We can't afford that dress. Sarah, my husband Tom said, barely looking up from his phone as I held up the simple blue sundress in the department store. It was on sale for $48. Money's tight this month. The mortgage is due. And we've got the car payment coming up. I stood there in the middle of Macy's holding a $48 dress while my husband of 12 years told me we couldn't afford it. The same husband who'd just returned from a weekend golf trip to Scottsdale with his buddies. The same husband who drove a BMW and wore a Rolex. The same husband who'd convinced me years ago that we needed to be financially responsible, which apparently meant I couldn't spend $50 on a dress. I nodded, smiled, and put the dress back on the rack. You're right, honey. We need to be careful with money. What Tom didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that 3 days earlier, I'd discovered his secret offshore accounts containing over $2 million. Money he'd been hiding from me for years while making me feel guilty about every small purchase. While controlling every aspect of our finances. While positioning himself as the responsible financial manager of our household. Tom also didn't know that I was a forensic accountant specializing in uncovering hidden assets for high net worth divorce cases. My entire career was built on finding money that people thought they'd successfully hidden. And my husband had just made the fatal mistake of underestimating the woman whose job was literally finding hidden money. As we left the store empty-handed and Tom complained about needing to watch our budget, I was already mentally drafting the divorce petition that would take everything he thought he'd so cleverly hidden from me. In exactly 90 days, Tom Mitchell would discover that the biggest mistake of his life wasn't hiding money from his wife. It was hiding money from a forensic accountant who knew every trick in the book because she'd seen them all 1,000 times before. Before we dive into how a woman who'd been financially controlled and manipulated for over a decade systematically dismantled her husband's hidden empire and left him with nothing, I want to thank each of you for being part of our community of over 600,000 subscribers who believe that financial abuse is real abuse and deserves consequences just as severe as any other betrayal. If you've ever been made to feel guilty about spending your own money while your partner lived without limits, this story will resonate deeply. Hit that subscribe button to join thousands who appreciate stories where expertise becomes the ultimate weapon against manipulation. Now let's step into the world of a marriage built on lies, control, and the fatal assumption that a forensic accountant wouldn't notice her own husband stealing from their marriage. My name is Sarah Mitchell. And 12 years ago I married Tom Mitchell thinking I'd found a partner who shared my values about building a stable, financially secure life together. I was 26, fresh out of my master's program in forensic accounting, starting my career at a prestigious firm in Denver that specialized in complex financial investigations for litigation and divorce cases. Tom was 30, working in commercial real estate, charming and confident in a way that made me feel protected rather than controlled. He had opinions about money, about investing, about building wealth, and I appreciated what seemed like financial sophistication from someone who understood markets and property values. Our early relationship followed a pattern I didn't recognize as problematic until years later. Tom would suggest restaurants for our dates, then casually mention how expensive they were and how we needed to be mindful of costs. He'd compliment my clothes but add comments about how I didn't need to spend so much on fashion. He'd review our spending after trips together, pointing out places where we could have been more frugal. At the time, I interpreted this as fiscal responsibility. Tom was helping me become more financially mature, more aware of unnecessary spending, more focused on long-term wealth building rather than short-term gratification. I'd grown up in a middle-class family where money was sometimes tight, and Tom's apparent expertise seemed like exactly what I needed to achieve the financial security I'd always wanted. We married after 2 years of dating, and Tom immediately suggested we combine our finances completely. Married couples should be transparent about money, he explained. Separate accounts create distance and mistrust. We're a team now. It made sense to me. We opened joint accounts, combined our savings, and Tom took charge of managing our finances since he worked in real estate and understood investments better. I was busy building my career as a forensic accountant, working long hours on complex cases, and I appreciated having someone handle the administrative aspects of our financial life. The control started subtly. Tom would review our credit card statements and question my purchases. Not aggressively at first. Just curious questions about why I'd spent $30 at Target or $15 at Starbucks. The questions made me more conscious of my spending, more careful about what I bought, more likely to ask permission before making purchases. He established a household budget that gave me an allowance for personal spending, $200 a month for clothes, entertainment, and incidentals. Anything beyond that needed to be discussed and approved. We're saving for a house, he'd explain. We need to be disciplined about spending if we want to build real wealth. I accepted this arrangement because it came wrapped in the language of partnership and shared goals. We were building something together, and that required sacrifice and discipline. Tom was just being the responsible financial manager, making sure we stayed on track. But while I was limited to $200 a month for personal spending, Tom had no such restrictions. He bought expensive golf clubs, went on weekend trips with friends, upgraded his car to a BMW, and purchased a Rolex, all justified as necessary for his career, important for maintaining professional relationships, essential for projecting success in the real estate industry. When I questioned these double standards, Tom had explanations that seemed rational in the moment. His spending was investment in his career that would benefit both of us. My spending was consumption that provided no return. The distinction sounded logical until I really examined it years later and realized it was just sophisticated justification for control. The financial manipulation escalated over time. Tom started handling all bill payments, all investment decisions, all major financial management. I had access to our accounts technically, but Tom positioned himself as the expert who understood these things better. And I was busy with my demanding career investigating other people's financial crimes while missing the ones happening in my own home. We bought a house, and Tom handled all the paperwork. The mortgage, the deed, the title. I signed where he indicated without reviewing closely because I trusted him. We refinanced a few years later. And again I signed documents without careful review because Tom assured me he'd negotiated excellent terms. My career progressed significantly. I became a partner at my firm. My income increased substantially, and I was regularly featured in professional publications as an expert in forensic accounting. Ironically, I was becoming known for my ability to uncover hidden assets and financial deception while completely missing the deception in my own marriage. Tom used my success to further justify his control. Your career is so demanding, he'd say. Let me handle the finances so you can focus on your work. That's where you add the most value to our family. It sounded supportive. It felt like partnership. But it was really just another layer of control that kept me from seeing what was actually happening with our money. The isolation was psychological as well as financial. When I'd mention wanting to take a vacation, Tom would review our budget and explain why we couldn't afford it. When I'd suggest buying something for the house, he'd point out other priorities that needed to come first. When I'd talk about wanting to help my parents financially, he'd explain why that would jeopardize our own financial security. Every desire, every want, every impulse to spend money on anything was filtered through Tom's approval. And gradually, over years of this dynamic, I stopped wanting things. I stopped suggesting expenditures. I stopped thinking about what I might want to buy because the answer was always some version of no. We can't afford that. We need to be responsible. Meanwhile, Tom's spending continued unrestricted. New golf clubs appeared regularly. Weekend trips became monthly occurrences. His car was upgraded every 3 years. His wardrobe was always current and expensive. But whenever I noticed these discrepancies and raised questions, Tom had explanations about career necessities and investment in professional relationships that I was too financially unsophisticated to understand. Looking back, I can see how masterfully he manipulated me using my own expertise against me. I was a forensic accountant who understood complex financial structures. Yet I'd been conditioned to defer to my husband's supposed expertise about our personal finances. I'd been trained to find hidden assets for clients. Yet I never examined my own household's finances with the same skeptical eye. The psychological toll was significant. I felt guilty about wanting things. I felt ashamed when I spent money on myself. I felt like I was failing as a partner when I couldn't control my desire for small luxuries. Tom had successfully transformed me from a confident, successful professional into someone who felt guilty about buying a $48 dress. Then came the case that changed everything. A client hired our firm to investigate her husband's finances during their divorce. He was a successful businessman who claimed poverty while she suspected hidden wealth. My job was to find what he was hiding. Over 3 months, I systematically uncovered a network of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and property holdings registered in various names, a complex structure designed to hide assets from his wife while maintaining his lifestyle. It was sophisticated, carefully constructed, and would have been nearly impossible to detect without specialized expertise. But I found it all. Every account, every asset, every dollar he tried to hide. And as I was documenting my findings, something made me pause. The structure looked familiar. The pattern of hiding wealth while claiming poverty reminded me of something I couldn't quite place. Then it hit me. It reminded me of my own marriage. Tom claiming we couldn't afford things while somehow maintaining an expensive lifestyle. Tom controlling our finances while keeping me in the dark about details. Tom positioning himself as the responsible financial manager while I was kept on an allowance. That night, I went home and for the first time in 12 years, I examined our personal finances with the same forensic attention I'd given to my client's case. I pulled every statement, every document, every record I could access from our joint accounts. And then I started looking for what I couldn't see, using the same techniques I'd used to uncover my client's hidden assets. What I found made me physically sick. Tom had been systematically diverting money from our marriage for years. Bonuses I'd earned that supposedly went into our savings had actually been transferred to accounts I didn't know existed, refinancing proceeds from our house that were supposed to be invested had disappeared into offshore structures. Even some of my own salary had been redirected without my knowledge through carefully manipulated direct deposit allocations. Over 10 years of our marriage, Tom had hidden over $2 million in various accounts, investments, and property holdings, all while making me feel guilty about spending $48 on a dress, all while claiming we needed to be careful with money, all while positioning himself as the financially responsible partner protecting our future. The offshore accounts were in both our names technically, but structured so that only Tom had access and control. The property holdings were registered through LLCs with Tom as the sole managing member. The investment accounts required both signatures theoretically, but Tom had forged my signature on documents giving him sole authority. It was financial abuse disguised as financial responsibility, control disguised as partnership, theft disguised as fiscal management. And I'd missed it completely because I trusted my husband and bought into his narrative about being careful with money while he was actually just being careful to hide money from me. I spent 3 days documenting everything, building a case against my own husband using the same methodology I'd use for any client. Account records, transaction histories, property records, corporate filings. I compiled a comprehensive picture of Tom's hidden financial empire. Then I hired the best divorce attorney in Denver, someone I'd worked with on multiple cases who knew exactly how ruthless I could be when uncovering hidden assets. I walked into her office with 200 pages of documentation proving my husband had been financially abusing me for a decade while hiding millions of dollars. How fast can we move on this? I asked. She smiled. With this level of documentation, very fast. And very brutally, 3 weeks later, I had filed for divorce with a petition that detailed every hidden asset, every secret account, every fraudulent transaction. I'd frozen all joint accounts. I'd filed restraining orders preventing Tom from accessing or moving any of the hidden assets. I'd notified the IRS about potential tax fraud related to his offshore accounts. And I'd moved out of our house into a luxury apartment I'd rented using money from one of Tom's hidden accounts. Tom came home from work to find divorce papers, restraining orders, and his entire financial structure exposed and frozen. Every account he'd spent years carefully hiding was now documented, cataloged, and locked down by court order. Every asset he'd thought was safely protected was now subject to division in divorce proceedings. And the wife he'd financially controlled for 12 years was now the forensic accountant, systematically dismantling everything he'd built on lies. The initial hearing was 3 days after service of papers, before Tom had time to move assets or establish legal strategy. My attorney presented the 200 pages of documentation showing Tom's hidden wealth and financial abuse. The judge, clearly disturbed by the evidence of sustained financial control and deception, issued temporary orders that gave me exclusive use of our marital home, froze all accounts pending final division, and required Tom to pay my legal fees since the hidden assets demonstrated he'd been lying about our financial situation throughout the marriage. Tom's attorney tried to argue that I'd violated his privacy by investigating our finances, that I'd overstepped by accessing accounts without his permission, that I was being vindictive rather than reasonable. But the judge wasn't sympathetic to arguments about privacy from a man who'd been secretly hiding millions of dollars from his wife while keeping her on a $200 a month allowance. Mr. Mitchell, the judge said, her voice cold. You spent years positioning yourself as the responsible financial manager of your household while actually engaging in systematic financial abuse and theft. You kept your wife, a successful professional, on an allowance while you hid millions in assets. You made her feel guilty about buying a $48 dress while you spent freely on golf trips and luxury goods. And now you're complaining that she used her professional expertise to uncover your fraud. She looked at Tom with undisguised contempt. Your wife is a forensic accountant. What exactly did you think would happen when she finally looked closely at your financial manipulations? Over the next 6 months, we engaged in the most contentious divorce proceedings my attorney had ever handled. Tom fought every point, contested every finding, and tried every legal maneuver to protect his hidden assets. But he was fighting against someone who did this for a living, who knew every trick because she'd seen them all, who had documented everything so thoroughly that his attorneys couldn't challenge the basic facts. The final settlement was devastating for Tom. Because he'd hidden assets and lied about our financial situation, the judge awarded me 70% of all marital property, including the hidden accounts, the secret investments, and the property holdings Tom had worked so hard to conceal. The house was awarded to me outright. His retirement accounts were split heavily in my favor. Even his BMW was given to me as compensation for years of financial abuse. Most painfully for Tom, the judge ordered him to reimburse me for all the income he'd diverted over the years, with interest, as restitution for what amounted to theft. That alone was over $1 million he'd have to pay from his share of assets, effectively giving me nearly 90% of everything once restitution was calculated. Tom went from secretly controlling $2 million to walking away from our marriage with less than $200,000, while I received everything he tried to hide plus significant additional compensation for his abuse and deception. The man who'd made me feel guilty about a $48 dress lost nearly everything he'd accumulated, all because he'd assumed his wife was too trusting, too busy, or too financially unsophisticated to notice what he was doing. He'd forgotten that forensic accountants are specifically trained to notice exactly what he was doing, and that underestimating your spouse is exponentially more dangerous when your spouse is an expert at uncovering hidden assets. I took the settlement money and bought a beautiful house in the Denver foothills with a view of the mountains. I furnished it exactly as I wanted without worrying about cost or asking anyone's permission. I bought the wardrobe I'd always wanted. I took the vacations I'd been denied for years. And I invested the remaining money wisely, building genuine wealth rather than the false narrative of fiscal responsibility Tom had used to control me. My career flourished after the divorce. The case became somewhat famous in legal circles, the forensic accountant who'd uncovered her own husband's hidden assets. I was invited to speak at conferences about financial abuse, about how controlling partners use sophisticated financial structures to maintain power, about how even experts can miss manipulation when it's happening in their own lives. But the most satisfying outcome wasn't the money or the professional recognition. It was the freedom. The psychological freedom of not needing permission to spend. The emotional freedom of not feeling guilty about wanting things. The practical freedom of controlling my own financial life without someone questioning every transaction. Tom tried to paint himself as the victim after our divorce, telling anyone who'd listen that his vindictive ex-wife had used her professional skills to destroy him in divorce court. But people who knew the real story, the years of financial control, The hidden millions. The allowance he'd kept me on while spending freely himself didn't have much sympathy. His career suffered too. Word spread in Denver's business community about what he'd done, and clients started questioning whether someone who'd engage in such systematic financial deception in his personal life could be trusted in business dealings. His real estate business declined significantly, and last I heard, he'd moved to another state trying to rebuild his reputation somewhere people didn't know his story. 5 years after our divorce. I'm 43 years old. Financially independent beyond what I ever imagined during those controlled years with Tom. And in a relationship with a man who makes his own money and never questions how I spend mine. We maintain separate finances by mutual agreement. Not because of mistrust, but because we both value the autonomy that comes with financial independence. I never worry about money anymore. Not because I'm wealthy, but because I control my own financial life completely. Every purchase decision is mine alone. Every investment choice is mine to make. Every financial goal is one I've set for myself rather than had imposed on me. The $48 dress incident that catalyzed my investigation seems almost trivial now. But it represented something much larger, the final insult that made me recognize I'd been accepting unacceptable treatment for years. Tom telling me we couldn't afford a $50 dress while hiding $2 million was the crack in his facade that let me finally see the truth. Looking back, I can see how carefully Tom constructed his financial abuse. It started small, questioning purchases, suggesting budgets, positioning himself as the expert. Then it escalated gradually enough that I didn't notice each increment of increased control. By the time he had me on a strict allowance while hiding millions, the progression seemed almost natural rather than deliberately manipulative. That's how financial abuse works. It's not usually sudden or obvious. It's a slow erosion of autonomy disguised as partnership, responsibility, or protection. And it's often hardest to recognize in your own life because you're inside the dynamic rather than observing it from outside. My work as a forensic accountant has taken on new meaning since my divorce. When I'm investigating hidden assets for clients now, I'm not just finding money. I'm helping people escape financial control and manipulation. I understand viscerally what my clients are experiencing because I've lived it myself. And I'm even more motivated to be thorough and aggressive in uncovering what people are hiding. I've helped dozens of women discover that their supposedly cash-poor husbands actually had substantial hidden wealth. I've documented patterns of financial abuse that helped courts understand the power dynamics in marriages. I've testified in cases where one spouse used financial expertise to control and diminish the other. And every case reminds me that I was lucky that I had the skills to uncover what was happening, lucky that I finally used those skills to investigate my own situation. Lucky that I got out before wasting even more years under Tom's control. If you're reading this and recognizing patterns from your own relationship, I want you to understand something critical. Financial control is abuse. Making your partner feel guilty about normal spending while you spend freely is abuse. Hiding money from your spouse while claiming poverty is theft. Positioning yourself as the financial expert to justify controlling all money decisions is manipulation. And if your partner is doing these things, you're not overreacting by being concerned. You're not being greedy by wanting financial transparency. You're not being difficult by questioning discrepancies between what you're told and what you observe. You're recognizing abuse. And recognizing it is the first step toward ending it. I spent 12 years with a man who made me feel guilty about wanting a $48 dress, while he hid $2 million. I let him control my finances, question my spending, and position himself as the responsible partner protecting our future. And all of it was a lie designed to maintain his power over me while building secret wealth he had no intention of sharing. But I had advantages many people in similar situations don't have. I'm a forensic accountant with expertise in finding hidden assets. I had a career that gave me financial independence once I chose to use it. I had professional connections who could help me divorce efficiently and ruthlessly. Not everyone in financially abusive relationships has these resources. That's why I now volunteer with organizations that help people escape financial abuse. I teach workshops on recognizing financial manipulation. I provide pro bono consulting for people who can't afford forensic accountants but suspect their partners are hiding assets. I work with attorneys who handle divorces for clients without significant resources. Because Tom taught me an important lesson, though not the one he intended. He taught me that financial abuse is pervasive, sophisticated, and often invisible even to experts. He taught me that controlling partners use money as effectively as they use any other tool to maintain power. And he taught me that exposing financial manipulation requires specific expertise that most people don't have. So I'm using my expertise not just for wealthy clients who can afford my rates, but for anyone who needs help uncovering the truth about their financial situation. It's my way of turning Tom's abuse into something positive, of using what he did to me to help others escape similar situations. The divorce settlement money has allowed me to do this volunteer work without financial stress. Ironically, the millions Tom hid from me while keeping me on an allowance now fund my work helping other people escape financial control. The money he stole has become a tool for fighting the kind of theft he engaged in. There's a certain poetic justice in that. I occasionally wonder if Tom ever reflects on his choices and recognizes how catastrophically his plan failed. He thought he was being clever, hiding assets from a wife he'd conditioned to be financially passive. He thought his financial expertise gave him advantages I couldn't match. He thought he'd successfully trained me not to question his financial management. He was wrong on every count. And his wrongness cost him nearly everything he'd spent years building on lies. The wife he'd underestimated turned out to be significantly more skilled at financial investigation than he was at financial deception. The professional expertise he'd dismissed as irrelevant to personal finances turned out to be exactly the expertise that destroyed his carefully constructed fraud. And the control he'd established so gradually and successfully turned out to be the foundation of a structure that collapsed completely once I finally examined it closely. Tom Mitchell learned an expensive lesson. Never financially abuse a forensic accountant. We're specifically trained to find what people hide. We're professionally skeptical about financial claims that don't match observable reality. And we have access to tools, resources, and expertise that can uncover even the most sophisticated attempts to conceal assets. He picked the wrong wife to lie to about money. And that mistake cost him everything. As for me, I gained more than just financial assets from our divorce. I gained freedom, autonomy, self-respect, and the understanding that I'd rather be alone than controlled. I gained professional credibility as someone who practices what I preach about forensic investigation. And I gained a mission to help others escape the kind of financial manipulation I experienced. The $48 dress was never really about the dress. It was about respect, partnership, and honest dealing in marriage. Tom failed at all three. And his failure freed me to build a life where I answer to no one about how I spend my money, where I pursue my goals without artificial constraints, and where every purchase reminds me that I'm free from someone who spent years making me feel guilty about wanting basic things. If this story resonates with you, if you've experienced financial control or recognize patterns in your own relationship, remember that you deserve better. You deserve transparency about joint finances. You deserve to spend money you've earned without guilt or interrogation. You deserve a partner who builds wealth with you, not hidden from you. And if your partner is using money to control you, that's abuse regardless of how sophisticated their justifications sound. Hit that subscribe button to join our community of readers who believe that financial abuse deserves the same serious response as any other form of manipulation and control. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Someone who's been made to feel guilty about normal spending. Someone who suspects their partner isn't being honest about money. Leave a comment about your own experiences with financial control or how you recognized and escaped it. Because the most dangerous financial fraud isn't corporate embezzlement or investment schemes. It's the theft that happens in marriages where one partner systematically hides assets while positioning themselves as the responsible financial manager. Tom thought he was building secret wealth. Actually, he was building the evidence that would destroy him the moment his forensic accountant wife finally looked closely at what he was doing. The man who controlled every dollar I spent for 12 years ended up with almost nothing, while the woman he kept on a $200 allowance ended up with millions and the freedom to spend them however she chooses.